Scripture reading this morning from Job chapter 38, verses 1 through 7 and 34 to 41. Even with my glasses on, I have trouble reading it. So I'll read it, something a little closer to me. It won't be exactly the words on the screen. I'm reading from the King James, New King James. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you'd know. Or who stretched out the line upon it? To what were its foundations fashioned? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that an abundance of water may cover you? Can you send out lightnings, that they may go and say to you, "Here we are"? Who has put wisdom in the mind? Or who has given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can pour out the bottles of heaven when the dust of gardens and clumps and clogs cling together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens or lurk in their lairs to lie in wait? Who provides food for the raven when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? Chapter 38 is a poetic writing that expresses the awesomeness of God, of how He is far above anyone and everything. The writer tells of how God is not only the master of everything, but He also actively directs and even details aspects of everyday happenings. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? Something that happens every day, we take for granted. Can you believe that God directs each one of them? In it, God asks, "Who is this that obscures my plans?" Most of us know the story of Job and studied it numerous times. I believe it is to try and give us answers to the questions we often ask. Why did this happen to me? Or why does bad stuff happen to anyone? Or why does God allow this to happen? We kind of are left with, we don't know His plans or why. This is, after all, what really Job 38 is kind of saying. I can't tell you how many times over the years I've studied Job. Each time I get a little bit more. Maybe I can give you a bit of what God has been speaking to me for some time now. It became amplified this time around in the study of Job. It would be an extraordinarily presumptuous thing to say that I understand everything, or that I have answers to all these questions. My understanding is the same as any of you here, but I do have stories to tell. Here are a few. Long ago, I was teaching a Sunday school class for middle school boys, and they were a bit of a rowdy bunch. The leader of this gang of misfit kids was Brian. I'll bet his school teachers had their hands full with him. I know that I did. He was the only boy in a larger family of girls, and that is likely some of the explanation to his behavior. Then his mom gave birth to yet another girl. Her name was Julie, and Brian liked to call her Jules. Brian was excited and happy when Jules was added to the cadre of his female siblings. At church, he always was holding his new infant sister. He'd bring her often to the Sunday school class and actually feed her during the class that I was teaching. It was a little bit of a distraction. Brian was always the center of attention anyway. This only made it more so. But I knew that this was important to him, and it worked for him. So I let that happen. A little more than a year after that, Brian felt a lump in his thigh, and it turned out to be a malignant cancer. It spread to all of his organs very fast. Within a few months, during which time he celebrated his 15th birthday in an intensive care unit, Brian died from that cancer. At his funeral, one of his cousins, a girl about the same age as him, gave a wrenching testimony at his funeral, something Brian did for her near the very end. She was visiting Brian in the hospital and was in his room when he started to go into respiratory distress and a code blue was triggered. Nurses and doctors rushed into his room and started to do what they did in that kind of situation, trying to keep Brian alive. His cousin testified that she hadn't withdrawn from the room yet. She was still in the room and was terrified of what was happening, and she started to cry. And in the midst of that, Brian turned his head to her, and he asked her, "Are you okay?" To this day, I still remember Brian walking right behind his 1-year-old sister, Jules, in the church hallway, ready to catch her and lift her when she fell. Penny and Larry had a kind of storybook love that you could think only would be in a Disney movie. Throughout high school, they were a couple, and everyone from counties around knew them as a couple. She was raised a devout Christian in the Assembly of God, and he was raised Catholic. Their wedding was held in the largest church venue in town, a Zion Lutheran church, upon the highest hill on the edge of town, and both his Catholic priest and her Assembly of God pastor co-officiated the service and blessed their marriage shortly after they graduated from high school together. They got careers, moved around, had 2 boys and a girl. In her 40s, Penny was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. For 5 years, she fought it before she lost the battle. Penny was my kid sister. Older than me by some 9 years, but still my kid sister. As a family, we all knew she was terminal and had a family reunion together that year, knowing it would be the last time we were all together as a family. After the 5-year battle, she was 80 pounds and unrecognizable. The disease had taken much from that vibrant sister of mine. A few months after the reunion, I received word that she was close to death, and I had the opportunity to go visit her, but I didn't go. I said I had work to do and gave other reasons for not going, but I knew it was my fear not wanting to see her like that again before the end. At Penny's funeral, I confessed this to some others who were her friends that were there. They said they too were afraid to see her in those last weeks, but they went anyway. And they testified that they left strangely uplifted. Even in her last, she was able to lift others up. And that too was a testament to me of what God's spiritual strength does for us, even when all the physical strength is gone. Sorry if I'm struggling a little bit. It was easier to type this than to speak it. Charlie Hill came up to me after the evening meal on the first night of our church's turn to shelter the homeless. I was the director of the program this time around, and he, one of the homeless we were sheltering, wanted to help in some way, any way he could. Charlie was a frail old guy, but I could see it was important to him, so I gave him some regular work in the cleanup each evening. Each morning we would serve the homeless in our care in a breakfast with prayer, hand them their sack lunch for the day as they boarded a bus for the city. On Thursday, a couple days shy of our week to come to an end, I handed Charlie his lunch before going out to the bus, and he spontaneously hugged me. I was surprised by the move of this. It wasn't like we had sat and talked and got to know each other a lot. He was quiet, and I was pretty busy with operations. But I did get used to seeing him each day. That evening, they returned to the church for the evening meal, and they bedded down for the evening. And night, Charlie appeared to be having serious health problems, so an ambulance was called, and they took Charlie to the hospital. Charlie didn't return Friday, and on Saturday I called the hospital to follow up on his condition, and they informed me that Charlie had passed away from complications to AIDS. Why do I tell you these stories? Note that each one of these people in these stories gave me something rather important. They gave me that important thing at a time you'd think they had nothing left to give. Also, some of these people I knew well, and others, not at all. I contemplate this stuff And now I have this connection between Job and Lazarus rolling around in my mind. And it's like wondering, where's he going with this? When Jesus delayed going to Lazarus, he knew that Lazarus was sick unto death. Most of us know this story well. Jesus finally went to see Lazarus after he knew he had died. He met up with Lazarus' sister, met up with Mary and Martha, and Mary and Martha were weeping and exclaimed, "If you'd only been here, he would not have died." Shortest verse in the Bible is there. Jesus wept. 2 words. Spontaneously, it brings to my mind the question, why did Jesus weep? He knew that he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead. There was a plan. He explained it to Martha in a way that Jesus explained anything while he was with us. She expressed her resolute faith in him. But could it be explained to her all that would happen some 2,000 years later when we read of Lazarus? Do you think Mary, Martha, or any of the friends of Lazarus would have comprehended an explanation from God about all the purpose and everything that was happening? I believe that Jesus wept because of the pain that Lazarus, Mary, Martha, and the rest of the community of Lazarus' friends were experiencing. Regardless of what the plan was that Jesus fully knew about, people he loved were hurting. I've only truly wept a couple of times in my life. The first time I was 7 or 8 years old and had cut my foot open on broken glass running around town without shoes on. Now I cried about when that happened, but I didn't really truly weep. That came a little later, when the doctor who was going to sew my foot up decided I needed to be sedated, and he gave me a shot in the behind. I remember bending over the table with my pants down, looking over my shoulder as I prepared to plunge the javelin into my rear end. I swear the needle was gigantic and had a square tip. You may laugh, but I remember it well. It was one of those turning points in my life. It hurt more than anything else I'd experienced up to that point, and I truly sobbed for the first time. The next time I sobbed was when my father died. I was in a dorm at college when I received word that he died suddenly. This was the guy who battled in World War II in North Africa, Italy, and France, and was one of only 2 of his original 150-man platoon to return home. He nearly died of a heart attack at age 36, after which Mom and Dad inexplicably stopped producing children. That is likely why I was a surprise when I came 8 years after that. He had heart attacks several times in his 50s. There were a few times we received word he probably wouldn't make it through the night, so the family was gathered from all over the country to be there. But he came through. He had a pacemaker put in at the age of 58. Later, while I was at college, he was home alone. Mom being at work as a nurse and me at college, he was working on cleaning windows in the house. He always needed to be working. And he suffered an aortic aneurysm just weeks shy of his 63rd birthday and less than 2 weeks shy of my 20th birthday. When I got word, I didn't know how to react. I didn't cry. I wasn't even mournful. It was weird. I thought I should feel something. At the funeral, we were as a family sitting in the private room. And this was like 2 weeks later, and I still hadn't really mourned. We were waiting for the coffin in the sanctuary to be closed for the last time and for us to be issued into the service as a family. There was sadness in the room, obviously. And I looked at my youngest nephew who was crying tears, not because he understood anything that was going on, but because he was sympathetic to the pain everybody was feeling, and he was crying. I didn't feel it coming. It just hit. I felt the pain of loss. I started to shake heavily in body-shaking sobs. It was completely unexpected. I felt that pain of loss. It hurt a lot, and that I would learn later that my dad dying changed me in very significant ways. Why do things happen? Why do innocents suffer? Job and his friends had established cultural belief that when people suffered, it was because they were bad people or their parents were. Something was wrong. We no longer think along these lines of thought, but we do still have these questions. Why did it happen? And later, somewhere in the morning process, the question often comes up, what was it all for? I can only say this. I remember that this is the God who gives orders to the morning and shows dawn its place. This is the God who is the Father of rain and who gives birth to the frost of the heavens. This is the God who binds the chains of Pleiades, loosens Orion's belt, and brings forth the constellations in their seasons. Our God is an awesome God. Attempt to imagine the scope of our universe and all that it is. Imagine the inner workings of the nucleus of an atom that we can now measure, but cannot fully explain. To the orbits of planets around the sun and the movements of galaxies, and how all of that has a recognizable pattern, as if they were different works of art from the same master painter. Imagine the variety of life surrounding us, on how it is all so varied, so different, and yet so sharing a pattern in every cell while having inexplicable diversity. This, the Creator, is the awesome God who wept with Mary and Martha. This is the God who wept in the garden. I think it would be presumptuous to think we know all of why he wept. Can you believe that this God who does all of these things has wept for Lazarus, also weeps with us when we are in pain? Can you believe that this God would have the unimaginable capacity to care so deeply for each person, that though we number among the sands of the sea, that he would weep when we hurt, that he would weep when we are lost? Can you believe that he created you and everyone else? And can you believe that you are important to him? Can you believe that you, every one of you, are part of a plan so vast, so intertwined with others, some of whom you know well, and many of whom you'll never meet, will be affected by doing something so seemingly minor as to ask someone, "Are you okay?" And that at every moment, from your mother's womb, through victories and failures throughout your life, to your final breath, here and beyond, each and every one of us is part of something, a purpose so high above our own understanding. Can you believe that our awesome God is active in your life, that you are part of an awesome plan, that you have an awesome purpose in ways you may not completely be aware of? Job stated that belief when in the midst of his worst suffering and chapters of his friends his so-called friends, telling him that he must have really fouled things up somewhere and that it was all Job's own fault. As they struggled to understand and lay purpose to what had happened, Job summed up his stance by saying, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." You are important enough that Christ would give up all divine creation power to endure an unimaginable death to rescue your relationship with the Father. You are someone with a purpose, some of which you may know, and much of only what the Creator of everything knows. You have an awesome purpose.